the first thing that happened was somebody standing on my porch with a clipboard like they owned the place before I'd even put a box down. They smiled, too wide, paper trembling in hand, and said, "Welcome to Hollow Ridge, sign here, and we'll make it official," as if homes come with membership cards. I laughed then, because that's what you do when a stranger tells you you can't live in your own house until a stranger approves it. But the laugh stuck in my throat when their welcome committee started pointing at a tow truck idling on the street and at a list of fines I'd supposedly accrued for not trimming imaginary hedges. My name is Mara Ellis. I closed on the house 3 days before old plaster. A crooked porch, a kitchen window that pours light at noon like a promise, and I had my deed in the glove box, my dog-eared title report in my phone, and a moving van that would arrive at 9. I also had the kind of naive optimism that lets you believe the worst thing about your new neighborhood will be whether your hedges match the neighbors. It turns out, optimism is a luxury when someone decides your front step makes good theater. The woman with the clipboard introduced herself as the HOA president, Dorothy Hale. Sharp heels, sharper tone, a red manicure that could scratch names into wood. She spoke with the pleasure of someone used to being obeyed, and the words she chose were theatrical: binding pre-occupancy agreement, community standards enforcement, non-compliance penalties. She told me, outright, that if I didn't sign, the movers would be turned away and the tow truck would remove my car that afternoon. When I asked for proof, asking like I wasn't asking for anything radical, she smiled and said, "Everything's on file," and tapped the clipboard like a drum. That's when my phone came out. I recorded it, because that's the reflex now, video as guardrail. I started live, because when you're alone on a porch and people are inventing power for you, there should be witnesses. The man in the neon vestone of a handful milling like extras in a bad movie said, "We don't want trouble, we just enforce." As if enforcement is a neutral sunset. As if towing is a kind favor. The tow driver glanced at my car and at my boxes, and then at the deed. I waved like a talisman, and for a terrible beat, I believed a small man with a clipboard and a tow truck could make legal reality by sheer force of will. But law is stubborn in its own way. The title officer I spoke with from the parking lot laughed at the phrase pre-occupancy agreement, the way a mechanic laughs at a busted muffler. Concerned, but unsurprised people will try anything. "There's no recorded HOA on your chain of title," she told Meplane, job done voice. "No covenants, no liens, nothing. Someone could print a pretty certificate, but unless it's recorded, it's not binding. That piece of paper sits quiet in the world until someone writes its name into the registry. Until that act happens, it's theater." It didn't feel like much consolation when the neon vest men were still idling on the curb, but it was an anchor. We went from theater to intimidation, fast. The tow truck backed up, engine like a low promise. Neighbors drifted out, some with curiosity, others with that particular social caution residents keep until it's either safe or spectacular. I remember Jonah, a retired mechanic who lived 3 doors down, stepping forward with a thermos and a look that said he'd seen a lot, but not this. Priya from next door emerged in slippers and a robe, hair a halo, and her voice was like a hand in the dark when she said, "This isn't right." Having neighbors is an ordinary relief until you realize ordinary people can be the architecture of your safety. Dorothy escalated when she realized I had witnesses. When her insistence met a recorded conversation and a few neighbors with actual names, it got louder. She started referencing dues that didn't exist, fines that weren't recorded, and a hearing scheduled for the next week at a community center that didn't rent rooms to private citizens for such ceremonies. She tried to turn the crowd into a jury. She tried to make sense of a private vendetta by laundering it in procedural language. Her motive, as it came out later, jealousy of new blood, the control she'd cultivated like a garden, and the pocketbook comfort of monthly donations that lined her ledger, was mundane and poisonous. People do terrible small things when they protect a small kingdom. The deputy who arrived did what deputies do best, make the world feel like it still has rules. He read the deed, listened to the recording, and said the word every anxious homeowner wants to hear: civil. It meant it wasn't criminal. It also meant the deputy couldn't just arrest charisma and call it a crime. He told the tow truck operator to stand down and said, politely but like a loaded fact, "If you block a public right-of-way, you can be cited." The tow driver grunted, shrugged, and started the truck back toward the service road. It was a small victory, a thin one, but it held. That night I sat on the porch steps with a coffee gone cold, and the house felt new in the honest way a wound feels new. Raw, possible to heal if you're careful. Jonah and Priya and a few others gathered, and what we did was make a list. We collected photographs, bank receipts, a scrap of corporate filing someone found in a dusty clerk's office showing the group had dissolved as a legal entity years ago, and Dorothy had kept operating anyway like a mayor who never conceded an election. We learned she'd been accepting dues into a private account, not a community escrow. That's when the story tilts from lonely injustice to something more combustible. Fraud folded into familiarity. I hired a lawyer in a voice that sounded braver than I felt. He was practical, no heroics, just footwork and subpoenas, and he organized the mess into a narrative that courts could understand. We filed for an injunction to stop the towing and harassment, and we prepared exhibits. The deed, the audio, the screenshots from the live stream, the bank deposits that matched Dorothy's handwriting. The exhibits read like a list of betrayals. What she said versus what the records said, her community standards versus the county filings, the aesthetics of authority versus the thin paper of her claims. Court is a funny theater, sterile and impatient. The judge in mid-60s, hair like fog, eyes that had seen parade and panic and tempered both into a slow attention asked for the essentials. My lawyer didn't grandstand. He laid out the evidence in a way that felt like stacking bricks plain, heavy, undeniable. He told the story of the porch ambush and played the recording where Dorothy's voice turned from velvet to steel. He showed the ledger of the private account, the dissolved corporation filing with a stamp of void, and the tow operator's notes that said he'd been told to make an example. Dorothy stood there like someone independently wealthy in moral certainty. She had a moment where her smile cleaved into surprise. You could see calculation flash across her face as she tried to convert authority into fact. In cross-examination, a few truths loosened financial irregularities, a negligent filing, the absence of any recorded covenant. Her motive, when pinned in a courtroom's quiet, came out like an old story about territory. She'd been the one to set rules for the cul-de-sac for years, and new owners threatened the texture of that control. She'd built herself into a role and then tried to make the role law. The judge's ruling was not a movie slam no gavel-bang melodrama, but it was clear and decisive. The court enjoined Dorothy and anyone acting on her behalf from towing, blocking access, or demanding signatures until proper legal processes were followed. The judge ordered the county to post notice to residents clarifying that no recorded HOA existed and suggested, gently but pointedly, that community associations pursue transparent, recorded governance if they wanted to be legitimate. The order was a legal light. It didn't fix everything. People with grudges often find new ways to be small, but it made it harder to hide behind paperwork. Afterward, there were practical things to do. We formed a neighborhood committee to create a voluntary, transparent fund for shared needs streetlights, a garden, a bench, something with receipts, and a bank account everyone could see. Dorothy moved out a few months later. Her house went on the market with a reduced for quick sale sticker that felt, to neighbors, a peculiar kind of poetic justice. People repaired fences, painted porches, swapped stories over coffee like mending a net. I learned that community is an active verb. It requires work and attention and the willingness to call out someone who turns kindness into an obligation. If there's a scar left, it's healthy, a reminder that ownership is both legal and social. You can have papers proving you own a place, but you also live inside a web of expectations, petty authorities, and neighborly kindness. That porch ambush taught me that vigilance matters, that documents matter, and that your loudest legal ally might be the quiet neighbor who brings coffee and remembers your name. It taught me how people can weaponize the language of civility to intimidate, and also how that same civility, courteous deputies, orderly courts, neighbors who show up can undo a small tyranny. I still walk past that porch sometimes and run my hand along the rail where my palm left an oil mark the first night. It's a small thing, but it's a record too. The house still creaks in ways that make me smile, and the kitchen window still pours light at noon like a promise. I tell you this because the story isn't about winning at all costs. It's about noticing when something is wrong and choosing, with the neighbors you trust, to do the slow, sometimes tedious work of fixing it. So tell me, what would you have done if someone showed up on your porch with a clipboard and a tow truck? Do you think community rules should be voluntary until properly recorded, or does social pressure keep neighborhoods orderly? Drop a comment with what you think is right, share if you've seen something similar, and tell me where you stand on justice, on HOA power, on the difference between authority and legitimacy. If one thing came from my mess, it's this: never let someone else write the script of your life without asking to see the paperwork.